Politics Unplugged. I'm Anne Trujillo, and this week, something a little different. We are devoting our full half hour to the topic of child abuse and neglect. We start with a difficult story that has a remarkable ending. Longtime Coloradans may remember a young girl kidnapped from the front yard of her home when she was just 3 years old. Lori Poland was left to die in an outhouse. Well, she was a fighter, a survivor. And now, 36 years later, a woman of incredible strength, Lori Poland is using her experience to change lives. Jacqueline Allen has her story.
She was playing with neighborhood children.
Before social media.
I just want her back.
Before Amber Alerts, a 3-year-old girl taken from her front yard in Sheridan by a man offering candy.
What happened on August 22nd, 1983 completely stopped the entire community of Colorado.
Lori Poland became a household name, her family's trauma on national TV.
Don't you think that you should have called the police to make sure that was true before you should have put that on the air?
Most people think they'll find a dead body.
But Lori was a fighter. 3 days after being kidnapped, bird watchers heard her cry from this forgotten outhouse near the I-70 Chief Hosa exit. The little girl found at the bottom of a 10-foot toilet pit. This rare archive video capturing the terror and relief only her parents could feel. But to Lori Poland, this was just the start of her story.
Can I touch you? Can I hug you? Yeah, I get that all the time.
After all these years,
Yeah,
they still feel that connection.
absolutely.
36 years later, her memories are flashes, images, feelings.
I know that I was loved and supported even though I was alone in a toilet.
She lived to keep fighting. This is the first ever publicly shown image of 3-year-old Lori identifying the man who sexually abused her and put her in the hole.
She was rock solid in her identification. Her body language said, "Mommy, that's him," and she sort of reeled back. She was a little scared.
Dr. Richard Krugman was Lori's pediatrician at the time at the Kemp Center and shot video of this interview. In a controversial plea deal, her attacker was sentenced to just 10 years, serving only 6.
Do you feel like justice was served?
For me, it's not really about justice. It's more about being impactful. And every day I wake up and I just try and be impactful and try and be good in the world and prevent people from growing up and causing harm.
Now a mother of 3 and a therapist herself,
I have a small therapy practice.
she's committed to making a difference for that 3-year-old girl, launching the National Foundation to end child abuse and neglect.
Of course you do.
Teaming up with her childhood doctor, they want to treat child abuse not just as a social issue, but a mental and public health issue, like suicide and breast cancer.
We've been able to see a significant shift in all of those things because there's been a focus on prevention, education, research, and advocacy.
To this day, the ripple effects of what happened continue, but Lori Poland has never backed away from a fight, not only for herself, but now for all children who have been abused.
I only know how to survive, and I will continue to survive.
Yeah, she is a survivor. Lori Poland joins us here in the studio today. I'm sure it can't be easy to see that video and to tell your story over and over again. Why do you do this?
You know, it isn't easy. It's never easy to continue to talk about your past. However, what we do know is that most people who've experienced child abuse and neglect, it lives with them forever. It's not something that once it's cured, it goes away. It lasts forever, and it has long-term effects on the body, on the mind, on the way that we live our lives. And so I do this because I'm trying to bring a voice to this topic, helping us shift the way that we look at child abuse and neglect, and really allowing people to start talking about it a little bit more openly and freely.
So, day in and day out, do you think about that event, that horrible event, every day? Do you have triggers? How do you get through your days?
You know, most days I don't think about my abduction at all. You know, I do know that it informs everything that I do. It informs the way that I live my life. It certainly informs my profession, and I am triggered regularly. Like we're all triggered by things in our lives, and but I just work hard every day to try and move past and use what has happened to me as a driving force to be the change that I wish to see in the world.
Wow. I know you're married. You have 3 amazing children. You were telling me.
Yeah.
Do you talk to them about that experience, or how does that affect your parenting, your marriage?
You know, I do have 3 incredible kids who have known about my experience since they were very young. Always age appropriate. As they get older, they learn a little bit more. And I think that part of my job for them is teaching them that it's okay to talk about anything, and it's okay to use our experiences in life to inform who we are, and it doesn't have to define us. It certainly does not define me, but I also want to keep them safe and protect them from the world. We live in a hard world, and a lot of hard things happen to all of us, and so I just try and parent them from that lens of being open and communicative and allowing them to talk about anything.
I remember talking to a lot of Columbine survivors who now have children, and they say they're scared about sending their kids to school. Is that part of the maybe the trauma that you feel? And I don't know if that's the right word.
Sure, yeah, no, that's a great question. I can't say that I am fearful that my kids will also be abducted. I know that's probably an underlying concern. However, my parents did an exceptional job of raising me to know that bad things happen in the world, and that whenever a bad thing happens, that we turn to our loved ones and the people who support us to get through those things. And so if my kids are fearful that something like that would happen, I say to them, well, you know, the worst case scenario would be that you end up like me, and how bad is that? You know, and we kind of giggle about it, and I just say to them, what I went through is horrific, and I would not wish that on another human being ever. And look at me now. Like, I am so strong, and I'm happy, and I live a very fulfilling life, and I would want the same for them. Yeah. So no matter what they went through.
I know you don't like to talk about your abductor. He only spent 6 years behind bars. Yeah. I mean, that has to feel badly for you. That has to hurt to some degree, or does it?
You know, for me, the justice system in 1983 was different than it is now. And so I could be upset and angry about the sentence that he got, and I could be upset and angry about the way that our culture treated children and protected children in 1983. Instead of being upset about the past, I really use that to inform how I do my job, and how I am so focused on changing laws and policy and the way that we look at things so that we can protect our children moving forward. So I really use it as like yeah, all right, that's how it was then, and that's certainly not how it's going to be when my grandkids are older.
You are so positive. Are you always this way?
I really am. I know it can be a little obnoxious for some people, but I like it.
I don't think obnoxious is the right word, but it's amazing that you have such a positive outlook.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a choice. It really is. And believe me, I have my days. Like, I have days where I cry and where I'm sad. I cry all the time, but when I feel a little hopeless, and that's part of it too, and it's okay. And I know that if I stay positive and I stay optimistic, that I can be the change, and I want to be the change, and I want people to join me in being that change too.
Well, you became a licensed therapist?
Yeah. So I became a mental health therapist, specializing in trauma and couples work, as well as in children's work. I love to work with little ones as well.
Wow, okay. Well, we are going to talk more about that, what you are doing to help fight child abuse and neglect. We'll do that right after this break.
Great, thank you.
Welcome back. Lori and I are now joined by Dr. Richard Krugman, who you saw earlier in the story. And the two of you together founded NCAN, the National Foundation to End Child Abuse and Neglect. Glad you are both here. First, let's talk about how you two came together.
Well, I watched a video of Lori when she was 3 that was brought to us. I was director of the Kemp Center at the time, doing child abuse work in Denver in 1983. And the Sheridan Police Department brought a video of a 3-year-old sitting on her mother's lap, and there was a lineup. And one by one, 6 men stepped forward and basically said, "Get in the car." And at the 4th, she said, "That's him, Mom. That's the bad man who put me in the hole." She was clear and very good in the identification. The police said, "Is that reliable?" And we said, "It is reliable." Not admissible in court. And we then went through a process of video depositions. Colorado had a law. And she came to the center for the next year with her parents, and we provided support and help. She had some good treatment. I was her pediatrician for a year or two until her parents got other insurance, and she disappeared. In 1998, she showed up in my office. I was then dean of the medical school. She was writing a term paper on child abuse, wanted to interview me. And I answered her questions, I think.
Yep.
Yep. Then we reconnected when I stepped down as being dean. And she said, "What are you going to do next?" That was 25 years later.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I said, "We need to start a foundation." And she said, "I'd like to help."
And did you always feel like you had a connection to one another? I mean, obviously you probably don't remember that from 3, but...
Yeah, what I knew of Dr. Krugman and David Jones, who was the psychiatrist back then, was that they had a pretty big impact on my life. And through that forensic interviewing that I did at the Kemp Center at that time, that led to the conviction of, well, it led to a plea bargain of my abductor. And then it really allowed me to do some processing through play therapy. And I think it had a really big impact on how I have navigated the world. And so when Dick said, you know, in his profession, he'd seen a number of medical issues that had been improved because there was a national foundation that helped that medical issue with research, prevention, education and training and advocacy. But there was nothing like that for the child abuse world. We talked a lot about that and decided that we wanted to first find out if there wasn't, and then second, if there was room for something like that. So we opened the National Foundation and Child Abuse and Neglect a year and a half ago, and I've been working to be like Susan B. Komen or like the American Heart Association or the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention for the child abuse world.
And I read somewhere that you felt like you had a voice because you were able to speak up, and I think that you were struck by how sure she was.
I think neither of us would be accused of not having a voice.
That's true.
Either in our professions or in our work now.
But personally, that helped change things for you, right?
Right. Well, and I think like a lot of things, like breast cancer 50 years ago, nobody spoke about whether they had breast cancer or not. It was a very private, personal issue that people kept behind the confines of their own home and their own closed doors. And the same thing happens with child abuse. We're afraid of talking about it as a culture. People don't know how to help. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to respond. They're shocked that somebody would do that. They're fearful that maybe they weren't as good of parents as they could have been. There's so much shame around parenting, but there's a lot of shame around child abuse and neglect as well, from bystanders, perpetrators, and victims, that shame causes silence. And so Dick and I united, and we are being a voice for this this field and trying to change the conversation about child abuse solely being seen as a social and a legal issue to also being seen as a public health, a mental health, and a physical health issue.
So where does that start? I mean, because you're right, I don't think that we have changed much over the years, that this is part of an everyday conversation. We just say, oh, how sad that happened, and then
the first step is to talk about it, and not in the sense of recognizing it so you could report it, but to actually use the words physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. There are more people who have told us of their pain from being emotionally abused in their family or in their school or elsewhere who never talked about it, and no one has ever done anything about it. Because we look at this as a social and legal issue where we need to get a lawyer and either prosecute somebody or go to court, we haven't addressed it in a preventive way. And we know we can prevent a lot, if not most, physical abuse. We can prevent a lot, if not most, of sexual abuse. And yet...
And psychological abuse.
And psychological abuse as well, but it's got to be dealt with by the health and education systems that right now only see themselves as mandatory reporters.
Okay, you talk about that word prevention.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break and we're going to talk about how we prevent these issues right after this.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Dr. Richard Krugman are joining us for a few more minutes. We want to talk about preventing child abuse. You say it is preventable. How is that?
Well, physical abuse is preventable. There have been studies done for years. If you provide help to families when their new baby is born during pregnancy, you can reduce abuse substantially.
Well, like what kind of help? What do you mean?
For most people, it's their family who help. For people who are at higher risk or don't have their family around, or from whom their family is part of a problem, not a solution, there are nurse home visitors and other home visiting programs all over the country. The problem is their programs. What we have to do is get the health system to just make this part of healthcare. We need to provide as much assistance to new parents as we possibly can. Sexual abuse prevention is also pretty easy. You just have to look at the environments where children are being abused and make them safer. And we've actually seen a drop in physical and sexual abuse over the last 20 years. Sadly, nobody knows why, because the research is bad.
And you make it sound so simple, because you said someone who has been abused is more likely to be an abuser.
Yeah, well, what we know is that 99% of people who are offenders were abused. And what we also know is that the mass majority of people who are abused do not go on to repeat what they learned. And so what we don't know, what research has not been able to do, is identify what the difference between those is. That's one of the things that NCAN intends to invest money and dollars for research, so that we can, once people understand things, we feel like we can do more about it, right?
How do you know to ask for help? I mean, how do you know to find intervention?
I think the biggest part is that parents feel shame. Parents have a difficult, being a parent is really difficult, period. Whether you're a parent with an abuse history or you're a parent without an abuse history, it is very, very challenging to be a parent. And so one thing that we need to do as a culture is normalize how difficult parenting is, and provide more of a supportive community around being parents and protecting our children and keeping our kids safe and giving our kids language that they can use to keep themselves safe as well. So, and I think that a way that we intend to do that is also to create a community of survivors who have not chosen to abuse their children, and not even just survivors, but people who have been affected by abuse and neglect. The way that there are communities in the breast cancer world or the suicide prevention world. These advocacy groups get together and they stand together, and those voices create a mass, and that mass makes change. And because there's so much shame around child abuse and neglect, nobody wants to talk about it. And everybody tells survivors, stop talking about this. It already happened. You're an adult. Get over it. Move on. Those kind of things. And that is the problem. And so we are creating a community for survivors and for people who have been affected by abuse, where they can have a voice, where they can be part of an outreach committee and be a part of the education and the change necessary in order to create momentum so that we can truly prevent and stop child abuse.
So if there's one takeaway that you want people to hear from NCAN and from what you're saying today, what do you want people to know?
Think about abuse differently. Think about it as a health, public health, and mental health issue, and not just a social and legal issue. And also begin to talk about it. If we could cure cancer by talking about it, people wouldn't stop talking. The truth is, this is kind of like cancer of the soul for some people, and we need to talk about it a lot to bring it out of the dark.
Yeah.
And Lori?
I would say the same, and I would say that we can't do anything alone, and that there are millions and millions of people who have been abused, many of whom have never spoken about it, and many of whom had no involvement with social services or got treatment or anything like that. And yet it's possible for them to heal and to become successful adults, to have children of their own and not cause harm. So there's so much possibility and hope.
And with NCAN, what do you, I know there's a lot you want to accomplish, but this is sort of bringing a community together, as you describe it. Yes.
Bringing the community together, having the national conversation change around child abuse, and really doing what every other health 501c3 has done, and that is come together to move the research and prevention and treatment forward.
Now, we want to mention that Lori Poland and Dr. Krugman will be the keynote speakers at the 2nd Annual Social Work, Mental, and Behavioral Health Conference at Metropolitan State University of Denver next month. So that conference is Friday, January 31st. It starts at 9:30 in the morning, and it will be at the Tivoli Student Union on the Auraria campus. Incredible conversation. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So
Thank
much
you.
more to discuss, and I'm glad we were able to start the conversation, at least here today.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you all for spending part of your weekend with us. We'll see you back here next Sunday for another edition of Politics Unplugged.